Hey, all right, we're going to talk about, let's talk about the typical items that you would need when you're applying for a mortgage. So we're going to try to go a little more detailed in this video. The basics, obviously, we'll start with. We typically tell everybody we need pay stubs, bank statements, and W-2. So that is the bare minimum. Pay stubs covering 30 days, 2 months, or 60 days worth of bank statements, and W-2s for 2 years. So that is the basics. Let's dive down a little bit deeper. So let's just start at the top. So you do have to have proper identification. So we will require a photo ID. All right, so that could be a passport, obviously. You know what a photo ID is. Driver's license, passport, a legal identification. All right, we're going to want to know where you've lived and where you have worked for the past 2 years. So we've got to have a complete 2-year history. So if you were in college or if you've just moved around a lot, unfortunately, we do have to have a complete 2-year history on both residence and on your employment, and we do have to verify those, okay? We've got to... All right, let's go back to your source of income. All right, so we do verify employment. All right, so we've verified in several different ways. Obviously, we're going to get pay stubs. So we're going to get pay stubs covering 30 days. Sometimes we will ask for your pay stub for the end of a previous year, or maybe even the ending pay stub for the previous 2 years. Typically, when we do that, it's because you have some type of overtime or bonus income that we need to average. So often when we get a W-2, even when we order the verification of employment directly from your employer, it doesn't necessarily break that out. So we want to get that year-end pay stub because typically whenever your income is not exactly the same every month, then we have to take an average. So if we're asking for a year-end pay stub, then typically it's because you have something that's extra bonus overtime that we want to average, all right? So W-2s, we need the most recent 2 years. And then often we need tax returns. That's full 2 years of tax returns, personal, federal only. That's the word I was looking for, federal tax returns. So we do not need your state tax returns. And we need 2 full years, all pages of those tax returns. All right. If this is a perfect time. So if you are in an early part of the year, maybe you haven't filed your tax returns, but you're self-employed, or maybe you have a lot of bonus income, and we need those tax returns because it shows us several things. It shows us what all you write off. So if you're a commission employee or large bonuses or something, we want to see if you're writing a lot of things off because we actually have to deduct that from your income. All right. If you have a side business, a secondary business, a lot of times that will show up and we'll have to get those tax returns. Not always, but sometimes if you have a W-2 employee, and a lot of people get these little side businesses and they like to show losses on them so that they can reduce their taxable income. That can lower your qualifying income for a mortgage. So just know that you want to provide that to your loan officer, have the conversation. Some products do not require it, even if it pops up. Some do, right? If you are an S Corp, if you have corporate tax returns, if you have ownership in the company, then you could have K-1. So there's all different tax forms that we have to have, usually the most recent 2 years, okay? If it gets past March 15th, then we got to have a copy of the extension. So if you filed for an extension, we need a copy of that extension, or for self-employed people, we will also have to have a profit and loss statement. So that is just something that you can hand calculate, showing what the profit and loss that you have for the year. Now, if we want to use that income, we have to have an audited profit and loss. So let's clarify. So a profit and loss statement for self-employed people is just what you do. That's just kind of showing the underwriter, yeah, the income's still in line with what those previous year's tax returns are, but we don't use this year. But some people, all of a sudden, maybe it's late in the year and they're just having a tremendous year. They want to use the income they've made this year. Then you have to have an audited profit and loss statement. All that means is that it has to be prepared for by an accountant. So an accountant has to prepare that audited profit and loss. And then on a lot of loan products, we can use your current plus previous year's income. We still average, but we can average that in. So for somebody that, like self-employed person that made $50,000, all of a sudden they're making 80, then we can average all three, and it could give you a bump to increase your buying power. All right? Payment history. So we do pull a credit report. So typically most of your payment history shows up. If you do have anything that shows up on a bank statement that may not show up on a credit report, like child support, alimony, then we would have to verify that with a divorce decree. Sometimes it does pull up in our fraud checks, and if you have a fraud, shit, motherfucker, ADD. Can I edit that? All right, payment history. So your payment history typically shows up on your credit report, but there are some things that won't show up on your credit report. All right, payment history. So typically your payment history will show up on your credit report when we pull your credit report, but there are some things that won't pull up. And that's usually like child support or alimony, or if you have any personal loans. The way that would come up is if we see them on a bank statement. So if we see that somebody's drafting your account repetitively, then we might ask questions and you'll have to explain. So that's also why they ask for 2 months bank statements, not only to verify where your down payment is, but we also look at those transactions and we see how many times you eat at McDonald's a week. We don't look at that. But we do look at bounced checks. We look at returns. Most of the time that doesn't affect the loan unless you're really borderline. If you're a very borderline loan and you have a lot of return checks, then we would actually, that could be a reason to decline the loan. So you want to make sure those statements are clear if your credit scores are barely on the edge. I digress. Back to the payment history. So if you do have child support, alimony, or even if it was several years ago, sometimes it'll pull up on our fraud checks and we'll have to have a divorce decree that shows that you don't have child support or alimony, okay? So sometimes if you're single and you're showing that you're claiming a child, or there are different ways that it shows up, we very well might ask for that divorce decree fully executed and filed, okay? Let's see, assets. So that's where we get the 2 months bank statements. So we need 60 days. That's typically the seasoning. You've heard that term before. That means money has to be in your account. If you have a large amount of money that you get and it's in your account for 60 days, then we don't question it. But any large deposits in your checking or savings account, we do question, and you're going to have to document and source. So if there are any large deposits that seem a little bit abnormal, I think a rule of thumb is like if they are 25% of your gross monthly income, then that's considered a large deposit. So just be prepared. If you're making any deposits, if people are paying you cash for any reason, if you are selling furniture, anything you're doing, you have to have a paper trail. We have to document all of those deposits. Otherwise, we have to subtract that from your funds to close. And oftentimes the pre-approval is based off of verifying that you have the money to buy the house. Sometimes loans require reserves. Oftentimes, again, if you're kind of right there on the border with a lower credit score, if you provide reserves, it could help get you an approval. Now, what are reserves is that's just that you have some additional savings that you can log into after closing if something bad was to happen. If you were to lose your job or whatever, it has something to fall back on. 401k, retirement plans, those are great sources of reserves, but also if you just have another account. If you've got lots and lots of accounts, let's only provide the accounts that where the source of the down payment is going to come from. Okay, maybe a little bit more for reserves, but you don't have to provide, 10 different bank accounts if you're not going to use any for reserves and you don't even need the money to qualify. Okay, you might have the conversation with your loan officer, make sure they're aware that it exists. But if you start uploading all that stuff and providing it, then that could cause questions. Then you're documenting deposits on accounts that we don't even need. So a good loan officer will be able to pull those out and go through it. But you just want to make sure, we want to try to keep them out of the system, because once the underwriter does see them, then they have to stay in the file. Other types of income that could fall on the bank statements is Social Security and pension, things that are direct deposited like that. A couple months worth of bank statement showing that Social Security or pension income is what we would need. We also need the awards letters. You typically get that at the end of each year, but we also see those amounts on your bank statements. Also, we might ask for tax returns, because sometimes, depending on your age, your Social Security or pension is taxed, and that would show up on tax returns. If it's not taxed, we can actually gross that income up, which means since you're not paying taxes, we can actually get you a little bit of credit more than what you are showing on your bank statements for deposits. All right, additional information. We need a purchase and sale agreement. So when you do find a house that you like, you have to write a contract. Once it's fully executed, we have to have all pages of the contract, all the signatures, all those little spaces and lines. We need to make sure it's fully executed. When you write an earnest money check, we do have to get a copy of that earnest money check and verify that that money has cleared your account if you want to get credit for it at closing. We talked about Social Security awards letters, disability. If there's a home inspection, most of the time it's not required by the loan. So then we wouldn't need it unless somehow it's written in the contract. It's same with a well and septic letter. There are a few loan programs that require well and septic, but if it's not required by the loan program, and it's in the contract, we still have to see it, but it's just something you choose to do, which is probably a good idea, then we don't have to see those documents. Explanation letters. So sometimes we ask you to write explanation letters on credit issues, maybe even the bounce checks. What's going on in your account? Why did you have so many bounce checks? What was going on? Why did you have these lates? Why did you file bankruptcy? Tell us what's going on. The idea here is we want you to tell us what happened, all right? A little secret is we want you to make it clear that it was a one-time occasion. Maybe it happened over a few months. You rectified the situation, and this is why it's not going to happen again, okay? You don't need to write a full page. You really want to make it as brief as possible, but you also want to convey that information. This is what happened. It was a small window. It happened in this little window. This is what I did to fix it, and this is why it's not going to happen again, and that your credit's important to you. Those are the things that you really want to put in a good credit letter. Lease agreements. If you have a bunch of rental properties, a lot of times that income does show up on the tax returns. So therefore we wouldn't need those lease agreements. But there are times when maybe you leased it in the middle of the year. If we need that rental income, there's several different ways to document it or show that source of income, but we may need those lease agreements. If you are not a U.S. citizen, if you are on any type of visa, then we do need to document your visa. We want to make sure that you are legal here in the United States. So what happens when you get pre-approved and you provide those 2 months bank statements, but then you don't write a contract for 30, 45 days? Guess what? Unfortunately, we do have to have 2 months bank statements within the closing date. So you might have already provided a month of bank statements, but we might ask for an additional. Same with pay stubs, okay? Also keep in mind, we do verify employment the day before closing. So we are required, our processor does have to go through the system and verify your employment, that you're still employed the day before closing. So make sure you keep that job. Don't quit right before closing just because we tell you you're clear to close. New construction is another. For new construction, a lot of times customers get a little upset because they do have to provide a little bit more documentation. The reason for this is often you're writing different checks throughout the process for maybe upgrades, maybe earnest money. So whenever you write those type of checks, we have to be able to give you credit for paying those amounts, we have to show that it cleared your account. So we have to have that whole 30-day bank statement to show that. Okay. And then obviously if you give us, we need the bank statements to verify you have the money to close when you close, but maybe you don't close for 3 months, 4 months while the house is being built. Just know that we'll likely have to update those bank statements. Often we ask for a new bank statement, and people will get upset because they go, I've already provided that to you. If you feel like that, please have a conversation with your lender, because often maybe the dates don't match. Maybe you printed one online, but then gave us one in the mail one time and they didn't match or didn't cover that full 60-day window. So we as a lender, I know I have never lost documents. We don't lose people's information. It is uploaded into the system 99% of the time, and it is secured in there, and it doesn't just disappear. So often, maybe we fail to communicate exactly what we need, but if we've asked for a new bank statement or another pay stub, just know there's typically a legitimate reason, and it's because we don't have that consecutive 60 days bank statement or 30 days pay stubs. So now I know this process can seem cumbersome sometimes. I know sometimes the more you have going on, the more documentation we're going to request. I know that you may have $1 million and you could pay cash for this home, but unfortunately we're still lending a lot of money, and we have to document it according to the way Fannie Mae requires us to document that file, no matter who it is. So I apologize for the inconvenience. If you will just simply grin and bear it, get us that information just as soon as possible so that we can get everything cleared. We want to get all that in advance so that when you get within 2 weeks of closing, you're focused on movers and electric, turning on the electricity and the cable and the Wi-Fi, scheduling movers, all that good stuff. So we want you to get that documentation in just as quick as possible. We do apologize. We understand. I promise you, as a loan officer, I am not enjoying asking people for repeated documentation. We'll do our best to minimize it, streamline it, and explain it. But please just grin and bear it and provide everything. Feel free to question, but with grace. And just know that typically there's nothing we can do to get around it. Provide that stuff. Let's move on. Let's get the loan approved and closed.